Hey, it's Lisa Z from RCP with Jim and Laura here. We want to warn our listeners that the topics we're discussing today are very important to all of us, but they may be upsetting to some people. And if you or someone you know is experiencing thoughts of depression or self-harm, please stop right now and call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255. The line is available 24/7. It is free and completely confidential. Laura?
And in the UK, you can call Hopeline, which is for the prevention of young suicide, on 0800 068 4141. Or the Samaritans can be contacted on 116 123. Childline on 0800 1111. And if you're in Australia, there's the Crisis Support Service Lifeline, which is 131114. So what we're going to talk about, people may find triggering, and so it's important that you know what help is out there. And also, please do use your self-care tools as well. But we think it's really important to have this conversation, which is why we're going to be talking about key themes coming out of 13 Reasons Why.
And in addition to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline in the United States, you can call the Suicide Crisis Line at 1-800-784-2433.
Hey, it's Hannah. Hannah Baker. Settle in, because I'm about to tell you the story of my life. More specifically, why my life ended. And if you're listening to this tape, you're one of the reasons why.
Did you know you can get the next episode of Real Crime Profile right now on the TuneIn app? On TuneIn, new episodes of Real Crime Profile are available a week early. So download TuneIn today and listen for free.
New tonight at 5:30, there are concerns about a popular Netflix show that your kids might be watching. Some are worried that it's normalizing and even sensationalizing teen suicide. That show is called 13 Reasons Why, and it's told by a high school student in the months leading up to her death.
Yeah, one of the big problems, you might not even know your kids are watching this. News 8's Jackie Slater live in our New Haven newsroom tonight with how you can turn that show into a learning tool.
Hello and welcome to Real Crime Profile. This is our analysis of the Netflix original series 13 Reasons Why, as a follow-up to Suicide Prevention Awareness Week. I'm Jim Clemente, retired FBI profiler, former New York City prosecutor, and writer-producer of CBS's Criminal Minds. With me today from London is...
Laura Richards, criminal behavioural analyst, former New Scotland Yard, advocate and founder of Paladin National Stalking Advocacy Service. And I also have a master's and a BSc in forensic and legal psychology.
And I'm Lisa Zambetti. I'm the casting director for Criminal Minds, where Jim Clemente is my colleague. And we had wanted today to be joined by Cheryl Eskin, who is the program director at the Teen Line, Crisis Line, and she knows about 13 Reasons Why very well, and her organization has had a response to it and resources to help people who've watched it. She couldn't be here today, but we're going to do a follow-up interview with her. But yeah, we're going to start off by talking about this very controversial series. And full disclosure, I just feel like I need to let our listeners know that a very, very close friend of mine was a writer and co-producer on the series. And this friend I've known for 20 years, and we have the kind of relationship where my friendship, I'm not going to overly love something she's done or shy away from criticizing anything she's done. So I just wanted you to know that I approach the series like I would anyone else. And, Jim and Laura and I have a lot of friends who work in the business, and we, watch each other's work and have to have objective eyes when we talk about them. So I just wanted to let you guys know that.
So can you tell us the number for the Teen Line Crisis Line?
So the Teen Line Crisis Line, this is a Los Angeles organization, is 310-855-4673. And you can also text it 839-863. And the unique thing about this crisis line is that phones are answered by teenagers who are overseen by professionals, but a teen can actually call a teen who can relate to them and talk to them about what's going on in their lives.
Well, we're here today to talk about our take on the Netflix original series, 13 Reasons Why. And for those who have not seen it, we suggest you see it, but we suggest you see it with a support system around you because they tackle some very weighty issues. The main issue is suicide.
And it's important just to say that suicide is, in fact, the second leading cause of teenage deaths. So it does feature as a key theme throughout the show. But of course, there are lots of other really important themes that we want to talk about because it really does show the amount of things that people have to deal with, particularly young people, present day. With social media and so forth, which wasn't around when I grew up. So it kind of magnifies the problems that are going on. So, it's a really important context that we're doing this within, we're actually recording it as it's National Suicide Awareness Prevention Week. And we've all done quite a lot of research on the subject. And certainly just to say, for me, that at Paladin, we also listen to a lot of clients who are suicidal, some who have tried to take their lives or are in the process of, and we have suicidality call guidance. And I also just want to say I have had suicides in my family. And so it's a subject that's very personal to me in that my great-grandmother committed suicide on Christmas Day. And so it had a very serious impact on my family and still does in terms of Christmas and repercussions. And my sister also attempted suicide multiple times.
Oh my God, Laura, I'm so sorry. Oh, didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something I talk about a huge amount, but I can tell you it's had a very profound impact on me. As it does, the burden on the people who are the carers who love that person, it has a very profound impact. And the guilt that you feel. So some of these things, we're going to talk about, but in the interest of full disclosure, I don't just talk as a professional, but I talk about the subject because I'm someone who has experienced quite a few of the actual themes that are being discussed. And so it's very close to my heart too.
Well, we appreciate you opening up about that, Laura. I think that'll help a lot of people who are listening.
Yeah, and for our listeners, Laura and I and Jim have not talked about this series yet. We all, as you know, we watch things on our own and then we come here to discuss it. So, we don't know what each other is going to say. We really don't know what our reaction is to this series. But I'm sure that everybody listening can relate to this series because I can't imagine anybody listening who hasn't been affected by someone ending their own life, whether it's been a friend you've actually known or the mother or the brother or the sister of someone. And I have to say, when I was watching this series, not just the subject of suicide, but I was starting to get PTS just from being plunged into that high school environment. I was triggering all over the place on all kinds of issues of shame and body image and rumors. And I mean, I was getting very, very upset about things that really had nothing to do with Hannah ending her life, but just all kinds of things were ringing really true to me. And I didn't grow up in the era of social media. I know that you guys didn't either, but still, some things are still true that were true when I was going through high school.
Actually, I would say they're magnified a million times because without social media, there wasn't a permanent record of all the bullying and all the shaming and all the embarrassing things that now become permanent by being put out on the internet. And I think it's important to note that this new age of social networking brings with it responsibilities. And I think one of the main overall topics that this series relates to people is that the small little things that you do that are aggressive or not thoughtful or negative or hurtful to somebody else can have a cumulative effect that is vastly greater than what you intended. And therefore, you have a responsibility to not do things that could be hurtful to someone else and be very sensitive to other people and their needs and emotions and the situations that they're in, because you don't know everything that's going on in someone's life. And a little tiny thing that you do that's negative can really hurt somebody in exponential ways. But also, a little nice thing that you do for somebody can actually help somebody in exponential ways. So think about being that kind of person.
It really can, and just being mindful, as you say, because we don't know the battles that people are fighting every day. So That's why self-care, having self-care tools, and this is something that we talk about at Paladin. And in fact, we're trying to raise funds to develop recovery toolkits for victims to try and help them transition from victim to survivor, because it can be just so overwhelming. So self-care tools and knowing who to talk to is just so important. Most of the time, this comes down to the fact that people don't know or don't try and access help. So that's why we're going to keep referring back to helplines and tools and resources that you can follow up on. And certainly one of the things that I find very helpful and that we talk about at Paladin is meditation. And meditation can be for all ages. And the younger access, or the younger people are to have access, I think the far better, because a lot of this, sadly, it is about thoughts. And thoughts aren't facts. They are things that are in your head. And of course, sometimes people don't put it in the context that feelings and thoughts are not facts, and it can become overwhelming. So I certainly have a lot of respect for Andy Puddicombe, who created Headspace, who is a British guy but actually lives in LA, and he's made meditation accessible to everybody in 10-minute windows. And there are apps, well, the actual app, there are certain packages that people would find really helpful when we're talking about this. So there's a package on anxiety and on depression and balance and sleeplessness and balance in your life, as well as kindness and compassion. And the guided meditation really helps you train your brain. And so a lot of this is trying to, have you heard of Headspace, Lisa?
I was going to say, I don't want to interrupt you, but I second that. Headspace, by the way, is not a sponsor of Real Crime Profile at all. But I happened upon a friend I have who is in recovery actually was talking about it, and I started it, and it's wonderful. And he has a wonderful British voice, so that got me right away. And it's a wonderful, gentle series that you can subscribe to and have different packages or have the app or something. And it's really wonderful.
It is. We talk about it a lot at Paladin, and they're not a sponsor, as you say. But I think so much of this is about training the brain so that we don't get overwhelmed. And suffice to say, everyone gets overwhelmed at some point in their life. I don't think I know anybody who does not. It's just that when you're younger, you're dealing with a lot more in terms of your hormones, your emotions, you're just finding your way in the world. And as we talked about, it can get very much magnified because younger people do live their lives on social media now. And so Instagram and Twitter and all the social media platforms are active when children leave the school, and everything in life happens online. And if it doesn't happen online, it doesn't happen at all. That's how younger people, think about it. So the other person I'll mention, just for those who find meditation useful, is someone called Tara Brach, who's a psychologist who I find not just hugely funny in terms of her sense of humor, but just incredible in terms of her guided meditations. And she's a teacher of emotional well-being as well. So she has free meditations on her website. And I think that they are just so useful because she talks about trauma and anxiety and trust and mistrust, but in ways that it's very relatable no matter how old you are.
And I'll link both of those, on our Facebook page for everybody.
Another
Great,
thing,
thanks, Lisa.
Yeah, another thing that what you said brings up in my mind, Laura, about thoughts, is that personality, too, is something that exists in your own mind. And personality is the filter through which you experience life. So it can actually twist and shape and change things that you go through based on your own personality. And we participate in the formation of our own personality by the thousands of little private decisions we make in the privacy of our own minds. And that can be a positive or a negative thing. You can recognize things that you think about or tend to do or want to do that could have a negative effect on someone. And you can try to steer away from those things, or you can embrace them. You can get into sort of a mob mentality where you think it's funny and you guys joke or with your friends about things that may be teasing someone else or doing things that aren't, the best for somebody else. And you can do those things over and over and over again and they become easier and easier every time you do it.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate because then you can become, your personality can be one that is very negative, and you've helped develop that. But you could also resist those things. And every time you think about maybe doing something nasty to someone else because you're angry or you're upset or you're jealous or you're whatever, if you can think about you not wanting to feel that way, so let's not add that kind of negativity to the universe, and be nice and think of ways to help other people. And it's a simple thing. It's not that difficult. For people who can't think outside of themselves, at least try not to be negative to other people.
So we're going to jump into the series now. One thing I should have said at the beginning, when I was talking to Cheryl from Teen Line and explained to her about our podcast, she was like, I'd love to talk to you guys, but real crime profile, I mean, how does this fit in? And I thought, well, for one thing, we can talk about whatever we want to talk to that interests us, that is important to Jim, Laura, and I. But the other thing that I realized is that sometimes when people end their lives, it's because they have been the victim of a crime and of any number of kinds of crimes. So to me, it is appropriate for us to comment on that.
It totally is appropriate. And like I said, we handle so many calls from victims who are suicidal because they have reached the end of their tether. And, some who have survived very serious attacks through stalking, where they have said things like they wish that the person had killed them because the post-traumatic stress, the aftermath, the living with it is just so severe and enduring and all-encompassing and overwhelming. Some clients have said that their mind is torturing them. And so it is really important that people understand that people can have this sense and have these overwhelming feelings from lots of different things. But it's a very real problem when you have a psychological crime that is a drip, 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 or something very serious through trauma, how it can manifest. Absolutely. And of course, we also have cases where we have homicide and suicide together, where in domestic violence situations, sadly, I have had to review far too many murders where an individual has become suicidal and is controlling. And they have this notion of, if I can't have you, no one will. And they kill their partner and they kill themselves. And so we have to talk about this. I mean, many of these cases come through rejection and revenge. And again, someone not having the skill, and some having personality disorders, there's a whole spectrum of issues, but it does connect to crime as well. So it's important to make that link.
All right. And in this series, there are a number of crimes that they go through, and we want to talk about them. We're not going to talk about them up front. We'll talk about them as they come up. But also, it is a crime, as we found out from a recent case, to encourage someone to commit suicide. Rather than to help that person get help, to encourage them to do it. We've recently had a conviction of a young lady who did that, and she got her boyfriend, her ex, I guess, to commit suicide, and they found her criminally responsible for that.
Yeah, that's a case that we can talk about maybe in depth at another time. It's a horrifying, tragic case.
It really is. Can I just say that the other important thing to say is I've been talking to a lot of my police colleagues as well, because as Jim will know, a lot of times when negotiators are going out, they're being called out to cases where someone is threatening their life. So negotiators are trained, and I know one very experienced former DCI who I was talking to, he was telling me that he had attended at least 400 suicide attempts, where he's sat on ledges, on cliff faces, roped up, talking to someone who's, on the edge of that cliff about to jump. And in fact, he told me about one individual who did jump and he went over with him. Unfortunately, the rope caught and he saved both their lives. I said, that's an incredible story in terms of you saving somebody's life. But my question to him was, did he ever thank you for it? I mean, how did he feel, given that he wasn't just saying he was going to do it, he actually did it, he was committed. And he then told me this story about, he doesn't normally stay in touch with people that he has, and he said, fortunately, most of them he has managed to save or keep alive or talk them out of it. But he said he doesn't normally hear what happens afterwards. But he said in this particular case, he said that individual was thriving and he had just reached a particular point in his life where he just felt so overwhelmed because everything was going wrong that he felt people would be better off without him and the pain would end. But I've got to say there are a lot of unsung heroes out there who do that negotiation role, whether you're on a helpline, hotline, whether you're law enforcement going out there, whether you're family members, talking to people as well about the problems that they're feeling and obviously talking them round and getting them the help and the support that they need. But some of these decisions are like on our lifelines when we get calls. They are in the blink of an eye kind of calls and advice. So it's important that people are trained properly. So, which is why we have proper suicidality call guidance and negotiators and so on, who do a great job. And I was relieved to hear that in all of those cases, it had had a successful or good outcome. So I just want to show the different faces of, unsung heroes and people being involved in cases like this.
Yeah. And I think what you said, Laura, is very important because, and we should talk about it. The fact is that that case that your friend related to you demonstrates the fact that somebody who is so depressed, so certain that they want to end their life, that they actually do make a real attempt to do so, or an actual attempt that would have resulted in suicide had they not been thwarted, that it is still possible to go on and thrive afterwards. And that's a result of the fact that when somebody is suicidal, they typically have blinders on. They have lost all perspective of any other choices. They think this is the only way to go. And sometimes, given the opportunity, if they have an opportunity to take a breath, to step away from the things that are causing them this pain, that they can gain a new perspective and realize there is an alternative. There are many alternatives. And that is something that case really demonstrates well. They didn't know that there was a good life afterwards. They didn't know. They thought there was nothing there. And it's simply a trick that your mind plays on you by forcing you, pressuring you down to one option and one option alone.
Yeah, and we've got to remember that 47% of the time our mind wanders, and when it wanders into negative space, and we have a negativity bias. So when things aren't going well, that's where our mind tends to take us. And I genuinely believe that life's too short to feel lonely and depressed, and that kind of rumination and the negativity. Much of the time, that depression, it is treatable and there is help out there. So it does come back to, accessing help and knowing that for me, meditation, training the brain from a young age, cultivating the positive experience and having self-care tools, particularly if you are somebody who gets depressed, and knowing what triggers you is really important. And this show is incredibly triggering. I have to say, having watched it, I've thought about very little else. It's been on my mind and it's occupied my mind space so often. And in fact, I brought it into every training session I ran this last week, every keynote speech. And I asked people about it, and lots of heads were nodding, and people were telling me about their own experience. I was chatting to people on Facebook about it, of parents saying they've been watching it with their teenagers and their children. And actually, it sounds to me, I can't talk about everybody else. I can just talk about my own personal experience of taking soundings from people. The positive thing is it's got people talking.
Yes.
And that is important, but talking about things in an educated way and being able to signpost people to other care and other services.
If you think your child isn't watching, think again. A quick look at my son's Netflix queue shows he's watched all of the episodes so far. And on Facebook, several other parents said the same thing. One mother from Killingworth saying, quote, "No matter how much control we think we have, we don't. I have used it as an opportunity to discuss teen suicide and what signs might be there. The kids are struggling and need help."
Because there's so many themes in this, I just felt it was so important for us to talk about it. So it's probably a good point for us to start off with. We talked about suicide a little bit, but there are just so many other key themes that come out of Hannah Baker's, and this is the unique thing, I think, for me. We're hearing it. And I will call her a victim because she was victimized in numerous ways. We hear it from her voice. And to me, that's a really important part to this show. The victim's voice is at the center of it. It's very rare that we get something dramatized. And I know, Lisa, you'll have a lot to say just about the way that it was shot, but the fact that it's dramatized through her voice and on those tapes, the old school tapes that people have got to go looking for the Walkmans and the boombox, that added something extra. But just hearing her voice narrate through every beat and her thoughts and feelings, we were in her mind space, but having the victim's voice center stage with some of the other scenes, I think was just so important. And, what do you guys think?
I just want to say that, for some people, let's just step back for 1 second and note that this was actually first a book. It debuted as a young adult novel by Jay Asher, and it came out in about 2011, and it was an instant hit, and it won all kinds of awards from the American Library Association, Chicago Public Library, Kentucky Bluegrass. There were lots of distinguished awards, and in fact, if you want to go to audible.com/realcrime, you can even get it in Audible format. And it was a huge success, and it did not have nearly the backlash that the series has had. And of course, because it was such a success, it was developed for Netflix by both the author Jay Asher and then an amazing producer Brian Yorkie. So I just wanted to say that that's important if you want to actually go back and compare the book to the series. That's something you can do. Some listeners may have read the book or not and seen the series or not, and maybe they don't want to see the series, but this is a safe space here to listen. We're not going to spoil all of the episodes here in this one episode. We're going to take it chunk by chunk like we like to do. And if you want to follow along, and even if you never want to see this, you're going to be in a safe place to have this discussed over your earbuds. I just wanted to put that out there. But yeah, let's just start with the premise. It starts off the week after the suicide of a young sophomore high school girl named Hannah Baker. And within the first 15 minutes, it just plunges you in the world of her parents, the school, the community, and how they're reeling from her death. And we don't really know how she died or too much of the details at first about her life, but it's very efficient.
It is. And we see a picture of her, don't we, on her locker. And I've got to say, after the first 15 minutes, when I first went to watch it, I turned it off. First 15 minutes, and I just thought, I can't deal with this. It's such a morbid subject. I don't actually want to get into it. And I turned it off, but it came back to me because it was in my mind. And like I said, I have personal reasons as well, associated, but it was something that I found myself going back to. And I just know some of our listeners, funnily enough, did exactly the same. And some of them messaged on Twitter. And it's interesting that there's a whole bunch of people who did originally switch off from those first 15 minutes. I don't know, Jim, what did you think about the first entree to it, and what were your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I thought, first of all, that in terms of the format itself, I thought it was an interesting way to do it, to keep the victim's voice alive, which is something we try to do here at Real Crime Profile. So I really appreciated that part of it. And also, it was an interesting thing that the second lead was basically Clay, who didn't really know why, but he has these tapes. He's gotten these tapes, and he realizes as he's listening to them that these tapes are about people who hurt Hannah and caused her death. And that is something that, he fears. And you sort of go through that experience with him. Like, why am I getting these tapes? Why? What did I do as her friend, as someone who admired her and maybe really was in love with her from afar or something? I mean, it's really unknown at first, but it's something I think that draws you in because it's really a human experience. And I thought that he's a great character, and he obviously had a lot of affection for Hannah, and he's obviously really hurt by the fact that she's now gone. So there was I just thought the mechanism itself was very, very well done.
Right. I don't know if this is true in the book or not. I imagine it is. But yeah, it starts out telling you exactly how you're going to settle in for this ride, that this box of 13 cassette tapes tapes is delivered to Clay, and you already know he's going to have to go through each of those tapes. And essentially, this is a murder mystery, and it's narrated by the victim herself as she goes through each reason that led her to take her own life. So it is a very interesting structure that sort of lets you know right away what's going to come down the pike and how to kind of deal with it. So it's a brilliant way so it flashes forward in time and also back in time on two parallel tracks, like two trains running on parallel tracks, and one is just slightly behind the other. And I think it's just a brilliant way to tell it because, Jim, if you noticed, you could reassemble this story linearly from beginning to all the way to the end. And I'm sure there are a lot of other movies we can think of that kind of do that, start from the beginning, the seed, and then it would end with her suicide and then her funeral and blah, blah, blah. But because they reassembled it in this way, it really kind of shakes you up and makes you notice things that you probably wouldn't have noticed if it just went from A to B to C to D all the way to the end. And I just really appreciated that.
Yeah, I think if you think back to The Big Chill, they did the same thing.
Right,
I mean,
that's right.
It began as basically the Undertaker preparing the body for the funeral.
Kevin Costner's body, yeah.
Yeah, well, and that was a hidden fact.
Right.
Nobody knew who it was. And then you go back through the friends that surrounded him and eventually figure out what happened. And so there's a lot of parallels, I think, to this series. But I think what's important in this series is that each episode sort of has a theme, one way or another, in which human beings affected the life and death of Hannah Baker. And so the first person who was basically on Hannah's list, the first side of these tapes, is a boy called Justin. And Justin is an ex of Hannah's, and unfortunately turned what Hannah saw as a very sweet event. She snuck out of her house and they hung out together at the park and had a sweet night. They were talking and it ended with a kiss. And she thought, wow, this is great. But what she didn't know was that he had snuck a picture up her dress on his phone and then circulated it around to some of his friends. And then one of his friends circulated it around to everyone in the school. And that was a terrible event, a terrible violation. And it made her feel used. What did you think about that, Laura?
Well, yes, I mean, they kind of went on this one date, didn't they? It wasn't really boyfriend, girlfriend, but she clearly liked him, he liked her, and they were playing in the park. And as she comes down the slide, he takes this picture and he shows it to his friends. And then Bryce, one of the characters who becomes one of the lead characters, and there's numerous themes around him, and we're going to get to him, sends it around the school. And she's new at the school as well, isn't she? So you learn that she's just been moved there 2 months before. She, is pretty bright and vivacious and, has a lot of chat. I think she's a pretty cool kid in the way that she comes across, isn't she?
Very.
And they're very vibrant. Right. And, this picture changes everything for her. And that's the whole online element and the kind of this, slut shaming or girl shaming and objectifying girls that comes out as a theme immediately. And just that whole, feeling for her of everyone seeing something, this violation, and then you start to see how, it impacts on her making friends and people laughing at her and not wanting to sit with her. And so, it really is, as she calls it, it's sort of the beginning of the end.
It's turned and twisted. And out of context, the picture is just, like you say, used to slut shame.
And it's all rumor and conjecture, that they had sex. And of course, Justin never denied it. He never put people straight. He ignores her. He behaves pretty badly. And Bryce and certainly all the jock friends, all behave very badly. And it's clear that they have a certain view about girls and that girls are there for their pleasure. But then we start to learn a couple of other things, don't we? We learn about that Justin is looking round Bryce's family home. And so we hear from the coach that there's abuse in his home by his stepfather. He's not really a stepfather. Mum has lots of different guys coming and going. And, he's a latchkey kid and he's being abused at home. So you start to get a context of this. And of course, lots of teenagers go through this. This was in my life as well. And it's overwhelming at times. You just wish that you had the normal, regular family that everybody else had. And I think this is portrayed particularly well when he's looking round Bryce's home, looking at all the pictures. I know in his head what he's thinking about is, why can't this be my existence? So, you know, when we understand abuse for boys, it tends to be, if it's by the stepfather, it tends to be physical beatings and fairly extreme beatings. And for girls, if it's a male stepfather, it tends to be sexual. So they introduce this theme off the back of it. And then, of course, they go to the hot list, in inverted commas, don't they? This list that's sent round by one of the boys of the girls who are all listed down to, you know, Hannah Baker winning, what was it, best ass and, you know, best breasts and boobs, all of this business. Again, we get straight back into objectification, even at this very young age, and then sort of this locker room chat about how easy girls are, or Hannah in particular, and that she puts out, and all this kind of horrible, insidious stuff that kind of normalizes the behavior, right?
Right.
One other device that they use that I think is really cool, and especially in this first episode, they establish this ghosting effect, and we use this in Criminal Minds sometimes, where Clay, kind of the good guy in the series, will go to the park, and then he'll see kind of the flashback of the past happening in the park, and then see it in the present.
We used to do that
really
a lot
cool.
more in Criminal Minds.
But it's such a great device where you know, he goes to all these different locations that the tapes ask him to go, and sees it as the location is now. But then when he listens to the tapes, he flashes back to what it was then. And I just think it's a great way to connect where we are. Oh, and thank goodness that they made him have a bike accident in the first episode, because if he didn't have that bandage on his head, it would be very hard to kind of flip back and forth.
That's how they do it.
And I think it's nice that it was subtle, but it was there, and they didn't like have him have long hair, short hair, or something like that.
Sliding Doors did the same exact thing.
Love that movie, by the way. Yes, good shout out.
So, interesting things that happen in this episode, though, are that Clay actually gets dirtied up a little bit, and that he was actually jealous. He fell for what Justin did and labeling Hannah, and therefore next time he had an opportunity to see Hannah, he made her feel terrible and go away in tears, and that's something that I'm sure he regrets terribly. But it just showed that even people who were close and looked up to and admired Hannah were taken in by the rumor mill and the bullshit that Justin started and Bryce really accelerated. And so that's just another example of how something small that you do can really have disastrous effects.
And that things are not as they seem. That's a huge theme in this first episode. Don't believe everything you see or read. And the whole series really is Hannah and Clay misunderstanding each other's signals, and when they really, you know, like each other and have feelings for each other, but misunderstanding each other's hurt is huge. And whoa, that was really hit me hard. And it happens in our lives. It happens in my adult lives too. We misunderstand each other.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's an interesting character that's also introduced, and that's Tony in his red convertible.
Oh, God, I hate him.
Why do you hate him?
Oh, God. Okay,
Why?
Go ahead.
No,
Sorry.
why do you hate him?
Because he's so annoying. I mean, I understand him as a plot device, but talk about stalking. I mean, okay, sorry. We'll talk about Tony later. But
okay, well, anyway, it's mysterious. Why is he here? What's he doing? Why is he just show up when he shows up? I guess we'll see more as we get through the episode.
Well, that's the intention, isn't it? To create that air of mystery of, you know, where do people fit in? And, you know, and introducing him with his old Mustang and liking Joy Division. Yeah, I thought the music was great, you know, adding really good. Really and, you know, the whole Walkman and the cassettes. I kind of really enjoyed that part to it, of bringing in the old school and new school. But yeah, there's so many kind of mysterious elements to it. And of course, you start to understand, you know, Clay's, just not understanding where everything fits in. But you know that there's this list, and I've got to say, just the tone of the way Hannah certainly delivers things, this kind of I just felt there was a little bit of delighting in the tone of it, of, right, you're all going to find out exactly why. I felt quite uncomfortable about that. Maybe it's because it's my own personal, experience. But, there's a message here that we talked about, which is kind of be nice to people. You don't know what they're dealing with. You don't know what battles they're fighting, or be nice to people, or they might make you regret it. And that element of regret and kind of revenge, of this kind of psychological torture the other way round, wasn't lost on me. Of making people pay. And I think, that kind of guilt that people live with, because, your thoughts, like I said, are not facts, and people being held to account. Of course, there's some very clear crimes that have been committed here, and we'll get to those, but there's also other things that sometimes people aren't aware of, and they're not, you can't always be super sensitive to everything. You have to live your life too. And I do think that just the tone and the way that some of the things that her voice introduced was, made me feel really uncomfortable. But
It does. It did. It almost felt like she was terrorizing them a bit, which from her perspective is completely justified. But yeah, I felt that discomfort too, and I'm glad that there are a lot of these characters are flawed. All of them are, the adults all the way down, and I think that's good. That's
right.
Good writing,
Everyone is. Everyone's flawed. Even she's imperfect and missing opportunities to reach out. But I think that's important to say that right from the start, because there's blame and guilt in different parts. Everyone is flawed, and we all are as human beings. We're all a work in progress, and we don't always get things right. And as you said, Lisa, communication, is the real key here. We sometimes hurt people's feelings, but we don't intend to do that. We don't intentionally bully. Some people don't. They don't set out to hurt somebody. They don't set out to intimidate, or but other people can be super sensitive and pick up on things in a different way because we don't know each other's full context. So I think it's an important discussion to have on both sides. But the crimes, the things that were actually criminal offences, I absolutely want to get into.
Yeah, and I think another issue that's sort of laying in the background here is that this is all happening at a high school. And it points out that the high school does have a responsibility as well to find out what's going on and to prevent this kind of thing from happening. And when it does happen, to address it directly, because the ripple effect downstream can be catastrophic. And in this case, we'll find out it is in many different ways.
Yeah, Hannah says herself, doesn't she, that the truth will out, and that's what I always say in every case. We'll find out the truth eventually. It may not be immediate. And of course, this is drawn out over 13, sides of tape.
So in episode 2, the next person that's sort of on Hannah's hit list is Jessica. And Jessica is a friend that basically she gets introduced to, and they basically click immediately, and they hang out at this coffee shop, and they keep doing this. And
well, they're introduced via a counsellor, aren't they? A school counsellor intros them, kind of puts them together as the two newbies, and she does this kind of pretty geeky and rubbishy kind of introduction to each other that they find quite funny and start bantering, and they click because of their sense of humour, which I thought was quite a cute scene.
Yeah, can I comment about the banter? A lot of shows try to do this, try to capture this sort of teenage, way of speaking, snarky and all that. And some shows do it better than others, or they go far in one direction, far the other. But I felt like this show really got it right. Like, it wasn't too snarky and trying to be so clever all the time, like sometimes Glee was guilty of. And on the other side, it wasn't so Hannah Montana, Disney. It just kind of felt very authentic, very kind of sophisticated, wry, ironic, and smart without trying to work too hard. And it's so hard to get that right, that kind of dialogue right that feels effortless. So I really appreciated it, and it made you see why these girls clicked right away and kind of got each other.
Absolutely. They're both kind of describe themselves as that girl, and I think lots of people can relate to that, or girls in particular, and they kind of bonded over that, about their kind of them standing out. And I agree with you, Lisa. It felt authentic. It wasn't overdone. It wasn't overcooked. It felt absolutely credible. but they were smart young, girls transitioning into women, and just hearing all their fears and the things that they were dealing with over there, meeting in the office. And I used to call, we used to have an office when we were younger that we would go and meet in. That all of that felt very authentic. And then they added, obviously, they introduced Alex, don't they? They called him the stalker again. So we had this kind of light touch joke about a stalker. And for me, I really get fed up of hearing stalking talked about in this kind of comedic way. But of course, then they go back to that subject later on. But they kind of, Hannah seems quite sparky and pretty punchy, doesn't she? She kind of gives him this quiz about the picture and allows him to join their group, and they kind of become the Three Musketeers, don't they?
Right. That rang so true. Just having, three friends, no matter, what the gender, you're just kind of hanging out together. You feel like misfits. But there's a tricky thing with three. Anytime there's a group of three, it can be a very weird dynamic. Do you experience that?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously in the show, there's sexual tension that builds up between two of them, and they kind of go off on their own. And that leaves the third person out. And that can be, very disconcerting for that third wheel. And I think in this case, that's what happened. And what ended up happening was that because of the situation, it appeared that when Alex hooked up with Jessica, and then it kind of, so it hurt Hannah in the process. And then Alex and Jessica kind of had a falling out. So Alex did something to sort of get back at Jessica. But in the repercussions of that, in the end, it actually came back out on Hannah. He published this list of, who's hot and who's not, basically, and said that Jessica wasn't, but Hannah was. So now Jessica believed that Hannah was behind that and blames her. And so it's just all that kind of unintended consequences that can, flow from doing something nasty or mean.
Or it's interpreted as such. And there's just such paranoia already in high school. So Hannah thinks that they're hiding from her, but maybe from their perspective, they just don't want to put their relationship in her face and make her feel bad. So you can see, everybody's trying to do the right thing from their own POV. It just, these triangles are really hard. I know I had 3 girlfriends, during high school, and it was hard. There's a lot of jealousy, in a trifecta.
Right, but then you have them, going to the Crestmont to watch a movie, and of course they've chosen a night that Hannah's not meant to be there. And I think, we can probably all relate to that kind of being left out, or seeing that you're excited to see someone, then you kind of work out that, no, they've tried to navigate the situation and manipulate it so you're not around, and you feel her hurt at that point. And these are things everyone grapples with, whether you're a teenager, wherever you are in life, whatever age, yes, we can all be disappointed and hurt by people. So, there's another theme that I think is done particularly well, of just her feeling the odd one out again.
Paris Jackson, who has reportedly struggled in the past, posting on Instagram, the show is a warning for bullies, but at the same time is also an extremely triggering thing to watch. Critics say the show glorifies suicide, in part by suggesting Hannah gets what she wanted.
It felt like I was already dead.
Revenge. Netflix telling ABC News in a statement, "We support the unflinching vision of the show's creators, who engaged the careful advice of medical professionals in the scriptwriting process."
So, as we said, the show flashes back and forth in time as Clay's listening through the tapes, and it becomes clear that there are a lot of people who know about these tapes, and Clay is almost the last person to get them. So there's this increased feeling of paranoia, and he's being stared at, and he's trying to kind of get through this mystery faster than the tapes. And
what I don't understand, though, it's a little weird. Everybody has gone through these tapes in a week. Is that what it is, except for Clay?
Yeah, I know. I think it's been has it been 2 weeks since her death, I guess, when he gets his first tape, when Clay gets the package?
Maybe.
Yeah, I know. I think you have to sort of
go with it.
The time is blurred.
But anyway, at this point, Jessica basically says she's worried about Clay because although everybody else who got the tapes before Clay wants to keep quiet about it because they're trying to cover up their own
Responsibility.
hand in this, right? That they seem to not think that Clay is going to hold on to that Clay is kind of a different guy and he might say something. So they're a little nervous about him having the tapes.
Well, he's not in the clique or the gang, is he? And I guess that's, you have the whole thing about the cool kids and then the kind of the nerdy, geeky ones. So he's the unknown, the one that they're not sure about. But I think, one of the scenes in this that stands out is kind of post the hot list being published. And some girls, I think this is an important thing, some girls thinking that this is very flattering, and want to be on the list, like, Jessica, who's upset that she didn't make it on the list, versus, those who are horrified. And I think this is an important theme because a lot of the time what we see current day is that young girls are kind of flattered when they have a very controlling or jealous, or something like this happen to them, which should actually be upsetting and shocking, as we hear from Hannah's point of view. So this, again, is where we start to get into what a healthy relationship looks like and how girls and boys, that what healthy relationships between them should look like, and the distortion that happens at school when something ugly becomes normed.
So one thing I wanted to say about this list, this best lips, best hair, best ass stuff, that was going on even back in the Stone Age when I was in high school. There were all those lists too, and it was really hard to navigate that as a girl. Like, should you be embarrassed by it or proud? And we see in this case, the girl who gets best lips is like really happy about that, and she actually like puts on more lipstick and is not embarrassed by it the way that Hannah is. And it's just, every teen takes this differently. Every teen has different sensitivities, and you never know what those are.
Right. And I think what's important here is that Hannah's mother basically finds out about this list, and she sees it as another example of Hannah being bullied. She sort of brings reason into this, overlays the moral compass that should have been part of this decision. I don't think there was. I think it was a quick lashing out on Alex's part, but it's not unusual. I mean, let's face it. Facebook was started exactly in this way. This is exactly what Zuckerberg did.
That's right.
And now he's one of the wealthiest people on the planet. He's got one of the biggest companies ever in existence on this planet. He's got more subscribers to Facebook than any other company in the world. And he started it by comparing women, by comparing faces. Facebook literally was a book of faces of incoming freshmen.
Like a hot or not or something. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, it's really disgusting. And yet he was rewarded in a very big way by basically trying to compare women.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of apps since then are still the same. Not that I know, but the swipe left, swipe right kind of mentality. But we bring up the parents, and we really haven't talked about this experience for parents of children who have killed themselves. And I just want to give big shout out to Kate Walsh and Brian Darcy James, who were just incredibly just authentic to me as parents of a child that they lost. And I mean, Kate, I think that this is like the role of her career, and I worked on private practice that she was the star of. And I think that she just rocked this role and had incredible depth, and without, going into the maudlin or, this role could have gone very wrong, and I thought that she was incredible.
Yeah, I thought they played those roles really well, and were very authentic, true feeling, and the narrative from both of them. But wasn't he in Manhunt Unabomber, Jim?
Yes, he was.
Yes.
Actually, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, there's this whole cast of 13 Reasons Why. Many of them are alumni from Criminal Minds too. I mean, I saw so many people that we've cast, and it's wonderful to see them in this, actually doing such great work. This is where we get into the lawsuit. Now, can you guys speak to that a little bit about parents who, what do they have grounds for lawsuits? It's obviously a civil lawsuit, not a criminal lawsuit, where they hold the school responsible in some way for the death of their child.
Yeah, it's what I was talking about earlier. I mean, a school has a responsibility to protect the interests of the students that are there and the safety, and they should have a safe environment. And when bullying happens, when other more extreme crimes happen, and it's all related to the school environment, then the school can be held liable. I mean, anybody can sue anybody for anything. Whether they will prevail in a lawsuit depends on what the school knew about, whether they should have known, and whether they should have intervened.
So we see Hannah's mom talking to Principal Stephen Weber, who also does a great job playing kind of an a-hole principal. But also you see from his point of view, he's being very protective of the school, and he genuinely didn't see any bullying. And the counselor at this point says that he hadn't seen any bullying and has no idea that she was so depressed. But I have to say, this is a little casting peeve, and I know maybe people won't notice this, but I knew there was a red flag when I saw Derek Luke cast as the counselor, because you don't cast Derek Luke to just be this peripheral little part. I mean, that's just it kind of was like, oh, okay, something big is going to happen with him, because it's almost overcasting. So I was waiting for what was going to happen with his character in relation to the kids. But okay,
well, in this episode, Alex is having a really tough time coping with Hannah's death. And Hannah's mother, Olivia, is trying to find a reason for Hannah's suicide. And she didn't know about the tapes, so she's trying to find hard and fast evidence. But she does find in the girls' room graffiti that mocked Hannah. And so, again, she feels like this is probably the reason why Hannah committed suicide, that she was being bullied and that there were no people helping her, basically.
I think she finds graffiti about every girl. I mean, it's just, I don't know if I remember seeing anything specific about Hannah, but it was definitely just every kind of horrible thing about many, many girls in the school, and that obviously the teachers weren't aware of, I guess, because they don't go into the bathroom.
Right, and you get a sense of their isolation as well, don't you? They're trying to piece everything together, but yet you've got a lawsuit, which means that people can't talk to them. And, she goes into the parents and teachers meeting, doesn't she? And talks about those things that are written on the wall, saying, it's your children who were writing these things. And again, you kind of get this dual dialogue of just how tough it is for those that are left behind, the family, trying to make sense of this horrific thing that's just ripped their world apart, and they don't have any answers to it.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I think this is the second episode in which we get kind of a little bit of a negative spin on Clay, when we find out that he doesn't understand why Hannah was so devastated by Alex's compliment to Hannah. In other words, he, like a typical misogynistic guy, thought, well, that's a compliment. He said she's got the best ass, so obviously that's a great thing. And he doesn't see how that would hurt her. But Hannah actually explains that if you don't get it, you don't know what it's like to be a girl and to have your body sexualized without your consent, to have to deal with people whispering about you in the halls. And, even if Alex saw it as a compliment to Hannah, it certainly was not received that way. And sexualizing anybody and their body without their consent is not a good thing. And this is one of the potential downsides of it.
So one other set of parents I want to talk about is Clay's parents, who, again, are played by two amazing actors, Amy Hargreaves and Josh Hamilton. And I just really felt for them as parents of these teens, trying to navigate between when do you inquire too much, when do you give them space, when this happens when they know a schoolmate of Clay's has killed herself, how do they take care of him without smothering him? And I thought that they danced that line really well, and it felt very true. How do you? One thing I want to ask you, Laura and Jim, I noticed how many times an adult says to a kid, "Are you okay?" and it seems to be said so much that it almost doesn't have any meaning anymore, and it's scoffed at. Like, what is the right thing to ask? How do you know? This is probably also a question for Cheryl from Teen Line, but how do you say something without making somebody pull
Well,
away?
I mean,
that you're being
I think they do
insincere.
introduce this whole subject of, what to say and when to say it and how to say it. And Clay kind of has that challenge in episode 1 about helicopter parenting, doesn't he? When he's first trying to listen to the tape. With boys in particular, it's quite difficult, isn't it? Because young boys tend to be a little bit more closed down on when talking about emotions. And this is why with Clay, I think they get it right of casting him and this kind of letting everyone know he's awkward, he's socially awkward and he's not somebody who puts his emotions out there. And of course, there are lots of teenage boys like that. But I think, the reality is it's different for every child and every parent, that only they know what their relationship's like, but having real conversations and having real descriptive conversations. I mean, okay, if you ask someone in the UK, for example, if they're okay or how they are, no matter what age, the expected answer is just, I'm fine, thanks, whether you are or whether you're not.
Yeah, I noticed that. Yeah, when I lived there, it's like, you're right. That's
Right.
just like saying hello.
But you're not really
doesn't mean
expecting an
anything.
answer other than, yeah, I'm fine. No one waits to pause for something more significant than that. Whereas in America, there's a cultural difference. You're a lot more literal and will say, if you say, how are you? Well, I'm fine. I got up this morning at 8 o'clock and I had my breakfast and then I had a bit of a stomach ache. And, someone might take you through much more detail. So there's cultural differences here too. But I think British people in particular, young and old, have a stiff upper lip mentality. And it's quite rare to talk about emotions in a real sense. This, for me, is why, it's a parenting conversation, but it's also age-appropriate, healthy relationships and, social education in schools as well, so that there are two aspects to it. But I think it's talking about real things rather than just blanket, you will tell me if there's something wrong, or, it's asking particular details or specifics about what's happening, at school and how the day was and what did you do in class and, did you know, it's fine to talk about, did you know Hannah well and didn't you work with her, tell me a little bit about who she was or how was she, how did she seem to you? You spent time with her and kind of putting it in that context rather than just a blanket, just wanted to check in that things are okay, because it gives someone a very easy switch out. But once you start to get into descriptives and specifics, somebody's more likely to tell you a little bit more.
And I think to add to that, I actually called one of the crisis hotlines, to the suicide crisis line, to talk to somebody about the fact that we were doing this analysis of 13 Reasons Why. And she said it's a very controversial topic. They can't give advice, only make recommendations. And I think that it is something that she said that the most common thing they hear is that people feel isolated and alone. And so sometimes it's not about what people say to you, but that they're listening to you and they understand and they're not judging. And that's what these hotlines are set up to do. They're there to listen 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, anytime. There will always be somebody there to talk to you. And if you're afraid to talk to people close to you, if you're afraid to discuss this topic because it's such a controversial topic with people that you know and love, that's what these hotlines are set up to do, to help you so that there will be an opportunity for you to talk. Another thing is that people feel helpless, like it's not going to change. And the thing to tell them is you're looking at an overwhelming amount of things at once that make you feel like nothing is ever going to change. But what you can do is try to break it down into baby steps, solve one problem at a time. And each little problem that you can solve moves it forward and opens up options for the future. And hopefully, if you have friends or loved ones or family members who are depressed or talking about being suicidal, be mindful of their emotions. Listen to them. Try to understand where they're coming from. Don't try to change where they are, but try to give them a feeling of support, that they're not alone, that they're not isolated, that other people are going through the same kinds of things, and that there is hope for the future. They can take these little baby steps and move forward.
To counter that, Jim, I just wanted to mention that, that is all true. And, we're talking about cognitive solutions, but I also want to put out that there are some people who are physically incapable of changing their thought processes because of a mental illness, and that they need medication. They really need some real intervention to get their thoughts under control and their impulses under control. So, sometimes reaching out verbally is not going to be enough for many, many people.
But they can, well, that's advice that somebody can give, though. Mm-hmm. That's advice that they can say, talk to somebody so that if you need this kind of intervention, that you'll have it available to you.
Right.
So what are the hotline numbers again?
So I wanted to mention once again the teen line hotline. The 1-800 number is 1-800-852-8336. That's 1-800-TLC-TEEN. And somebody will be there to answer the phone either directly from Teen Line, or if for some reason they are not available, your call will be directed to the Dee Dee Hirsch Suicide Prevention Center, which is also an amazing organization here in LA. But anyway, if you are in the United States and in Canada, you can call the 1-800 number, 1-800-852-8336, and that is for Teen Line hotline.
And the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is 1-800-273-8255. 1-800-273-8255. Suicide Crisis Line is 1-800-784-2433. 1-800-784-2433.
So there's the Hope Line in the UK, which is for teenagers, on 0800 068 4141, or the Samaritans on 116 123, or Childline on 0800 1111.
So we have a lot more to discuss about. Gosh, we just scratched the surface on the first couple of episodes, and I know there's a lot more to talk about. And as I said, in a future podcast, we'll be bringing on Cheryl from Teen Line to discuss kind of the backlash against this series. But we have more to talk about, right, guys?
We certainly do.
What I don't understand, at this point is they're cajoling, they're trying to drag them in. These tapes have some pretty damning information on them. Why would they allow them to be passed on to the next person and the next person and the next person when all that does is open them up to liability?
Well, for one thing, they're teenagers. They probably aren't, I don't know. They probably aren't thinking of that, or I think it's established right in the beginning that she's got something over them. She's like, you either pass this on and do it my way, or these are all going to get disclosed. She set some very strict rules and boundaries on how it all wanted to go, and that's kind of what Tony, my favorite character, is all about, is enforcing those rules. So they kind of established that in the first episode.
All right. Well, I guess that's probably it. We're wrapping up on episode 3 of 13 Reasons Why, and we'll continue next week with our discussion and analysis of this Netflix original series, 13 Reasons Why.
If you like our podcast, there are a few things that you can do. You can take 2 minutes and go to Apple Podcast and leave us a 5-star review. You can also check out all Real Crime Profile offers and promotion and our sponsors in our show notes. Another thing you can do is go over to Facebook and like our Facebook page. And one last thing is, please tell all your friends, family and colleagues about us and spread the Real Crime Profile word. Thank you so much for listening to us. We really appreciate you.
Real Crime Profile is produced and edited by Paul Francis Sullivan. Sound engineered by Terrell Parham. Music composed by Simba Tsumba. Logo art by Jim Clemente. Real Crime Profile is produced by XG Productions and distributed by Wondery.
For advice and support if you're experiencing stalking in the UK, you can contact Paladin National Stalking Advocacy Service on 0203 866 4107, or you can go on the website www.paladinservice.co.uk. If you're experiencing domestic violence, call the National Domestic Violence Helpline, free phone 0800 2000 247. In the US, if you're experiencing domestic abuse and need advice, safety, shelter or counselling, call Genesis, the 24-hour hotline, 214-946-4357 or go on their website www.genesisshelter.org or the domestic violence hotline on 800-799-7233.
Did you know you can get the next episode of Real Crime Profile right now on the TuneIn app? On TuneIn, new episodes of Real Crime Profile are available a week early. So download TuneIn today and listen for free.